I would describe it as all of the worst parts of a roller coaster with no funnel cakes at the end. I was handed this book for free on my college campus, and instead of thinking, wow, that's a bit of a red flag, maybe they're handing it out for free for a reason, I thought, cool, free book, and I took it and I read it. I would go so far as to say that this is the worst book I've ever read, and I have read some very bad books. Let me introduce you to this absolute journey of a novel. Full disclosure right now, I'm so upset about this book. This is not gonna be like a rational, well-structured review. This is just gonna be me trying to express. This is really just gonna be me ranting about this book because I need to share it with other people, and we're currently, you know, in the middle of a pandemic, so I can't just go out in the middle of the street and scream about it. So I'm just gonna do it on the internet. What is this book about, you might ask? I don't know. I've literally no idea. I am racking my brain right now, and I could not tell you what the actual plot of this book is, other than one man's reckoning with being way too horny for his own good. So instead of jumping right into a plot overview, because as I said, there really isn't much of a plot to speak of, let me just set the scene. First of all, it's a science fiction that takes place in a world at some point in the future that is completely covered in ice. We're sort of just plopped in and we're told to just accept the fact that the world is now covered in ice, and humanity only exists within these domes on the equator. The one that the story takes place in is called Clemency, which is some divergent shit. The world building in this book is so bad. The few times that we get any exposition, it's extremely forced, and the exposition that we do get is so irrelevant and boring that it just feels like it doesn't matter. This book could take place in any universe, on any planet, in any condition, but the way that it's set up at the beginning makes it seem like it will matter. So I ended up trying to pay attention and follow the world building, and it was just a waste of energy. And I have a limited time available on this planet, and I don't want to waste it reading about some stupid world building in this shitty book. So anyway, I almost forgot. This is probably the most important part. There's animals in the dome. In the entirety of the book, we only really learn about 3 animals in this dome. We learn that there are gibbons, but hold on, because they're not just normal gibbons. They're maids. They clean the dome. And the way that it's explained is that they were like selectively bred so that the most, I guess, cleaning-oriented gibbons were bred, and now gibbons just like to clean the dome. From what I understood, it was like a glass dome, and they had to clean it, and it had some sort of greenhouse effect, I think. There are 2 more animals that we hear about, but I'll get to this later because I need to preface it a bit more because it is, I think, one of the worst parts of the book and most unnecessary. One of the most shocking elements of the world building that is sort of just mentioned and then never elaborated on or discussed in any further way whatsoever is the fact that when humanity retreated to these domes, the founders or whatever decided that they wanted to do a Noah's Ark style thing where they rescued animals, like one of each sex animals from all over the world, and put them in the domes. But it sounds like they just sort of dumped random animals in domes. We're like, well, I guess we'll take this zebra and this yak and this Siberian tiger and we'll just stuff them in the same dome. And the tiger ate the zebra and the yak died of heat exhaustion. So all of these animals are just dying, I guess. They're all dead and have gone extinct because we were, as a species, too incompetent to, like, I don't know, set up a zoo or something. I don't know, it feels like a big deal for me, but it's like not mentioned ever again once it's sort of offhandedly revealed by one of the characters. So this is sort of the world that we're in. Very confusing, not really well planned out, and ultimately not important to the story overall. So I guess I just wasted your time like the author wasted mine. What are the conflicts of this book? Well, we're introduced to quite a few at the beginning. So one of the first that we're told is that there's this sort of controlled fire, but the whole dome system is sort of wary of fires because because it raises temperatures and I guess also wastes fuel. That's sort of just an assumption I made. Again, we don't really get into it. And one of the other characters that's speaking to our protagonist brings up this instance of another dome where they did a controlled fire similar to the one that's about to happen, but it went out of control and it ended up destroying the whole forest to dire consequences. You may say, wow, this sounds like some edge of your seat conflict that will pan out for the rest of the book. What's going to happen? Absolutely nothing. It's never mentioned again. The second conflict that we're introduced to is that there seem to be some issues with the furnace. So every dome is heated by these furnaces, and Clemency's furnace is starting to fail. It's very, very old, and it's just not functioning as well as it needs to. So the sort of planners, I guess, of the city is what they're called, want to replace it with the newer furnace. But in order to replace it, they have to turn it off and not have a furnace for a couple days. And people are terrified because, as is revealed in one of the flashbacks, another dome's furnace failed and everyone died. So people are rightfully terrified because the world is this cold, desolate landscape, and the only thing keeping them alive is this furnace that is failing, which seems like a pretty big deal to me. This ends up taking a bit of a backseat throughout the book, and again, I'll get to this in a second. I know this isn't very well organized, but it ends up being resolved in like 2 pages, which is so anticlimactic. So I talked about the forest fire, talked about the furnace. What was the third conflict? Oh, that's right. There's a sex demon, who of course is a woman, because what better personification of a man's aggressive sexuality is there than an overly sexual woman? So let's get into the characters of this story, which truly are the cherry on top of this shitty cake. Our main character is Dorner, who I initially nicknamed Mary Sue because he is the most Mary Sue character I have ever read in my life. Eventually, about halfway through, I misread his name as Horner instead of Dorner, but honestly, it's a little more accurate to his character than what his actual name is, so I just ended up sticking with it for the rest of the book. One really important thing for you to know about Horner is that every single problem in his life is either caused by a woman or ends up being resolved by or at the expense of a woman. Our other main character is Rin. Every part of her character development, of the very little character development that we get, is dictated by her relationship with men. Literally everything she does in this book is for Dorner, because of Dorner. I'm sorry, Horner. Let's not forget about Tongue, the most important character in this book. She is a, first of all, sex demon. Second of all, tumor. Third of all, not really a tumor. So, once again, very clear, concise, exemplary storytelling and character development. Alright, let's get into the plot. So, as you may be able to see from all of the tabs in this book, I had a few issues with the plot, and the character development, and the writing, and just the existence of this book. I'm going to just issue a trigger warning right now, because in this book there are mentions of attempted suicide. There are also some instances of sexual assault. I don't think it's really described as sexual assault in the book, at least it doesn't seem like the author intended it to be. The last trigger warning I'll give is about halfway through the book, and I'll try to mention it again when I get there. There is some instance of pedophilia. The best way that I can describe the plot of this book is from an experience I had when I went to Six Flags once with my friend. There were not a lot of people, beautiful sunny day. We went on a ton of rides. We ended up not really eating anything, not drinking any water. I did not bring a hat or sunscreen, so I was burnt. I was like on the verge of heat stroke. We said, you know what, let's just go on one last ride together. Right away, my head snaps forward and I see my vision start to tunnel. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my God. I'm passing out. I'm gonna have to explain to my mom that I have permanent brain damage because I went on a roller coaster at Six Flags. And this is how I felt reading this book. I would describe it as all of the worst parts of a roller coaster with no funnel cakes at the end. So we begin right away by establishing that Horner is very horny all the time. On literally the first page, we already get a description of his dick, which is described as a hooked organ. And we know that he doesn't want to be horny because of something in his dark past. So we also know that he is very good at his job. He has some sort of ethical or moral leadership role He works for, I believe they're called like the planners or something like that. He's just fantastic at his job. People respect him immensely. And this is our first example of how the author handles exposition, which is that he doesn't. There's this very strange scene where they're on a train and the dome starts to tilt. It's something to do with one of the icebergs outside breaking or sinking or something. So he's on this train with a bunch of people. The dome starts to tilt and they're freaking out because they're on this platform or the train or whatever. Everyone's losing it because they're terrified that they're gonna die and the furnace is failing. And he is able to resolve all of this tension and all of this anxiety and these people around him who genuinely think they're about to die by telling them to calm down. I kid you not, he says, calm down, and then everyone starts chanting, calm down, and then they calm down. Eventually, he goes to the hospital to get this horny demon situation checked out, and we also here learn that there's something about... See, I don't really remember, and again, I don't have the energy to go look it up. But it's not okay to have, like, a lot of sex. Like, there's a big sex taboo. We're introduced to the doctor, who is the love interest, Rin, who is a woman who is literally and metaphorically tasked with fixing all of Horner's issues. They engage in this medical procedure where the doctor listens and looks at a person's dreams. I just want you to guess right now what this procedure is called. I want to remind you that in this procedure, absolutely no physical contact is required, and all that the doctor is doing is either seeing or listening to this person's dreams. Okay, guess. You're wrong. It's called straddling. So can you imagine if you're just laying on a table, completely restrained, and the doctor comes in and they're like putting on their glove, they like snap it, they're like, nurse, I'm ready to straddle the patient. So at this point, we find out that in the past, one of the other domes' furnace had failed, and no one wanted to help them because there's a lot of people, there's just limited resources, and they said, you know what, sucks, but we're hands off on this one, and just left them all to die. And then Horner came along and said, actually, we should not let them die. And everyone said, you know what? I like this guy. And they went and saved them. But they only saved like a third, I believe. But none of that is ever mentioned because, again, we gotta focus, you guys, blinders on the fact that Horner is really, really horny and has a sex demon lady living in his brain. So we have a section of just really repetitive straddling sections, and we find out that Horner really is still afflicted by this demon lady, and it's getting worse, and he's supposed to give a speech reassuring everyone that the furnace is going to get replaced, there's going to be a couple days of cold, but then it's all going to be back in working order. But instead, the demon lady possesses him, and he ends up telling everyone that they're going to die. So he kind of fails at that one singular task that he has, and this is really the only example we have of him actually working. But still, we're supposed to believe that he is this incredible, beloved government employee that everyone loves. He's like a folk hero, basically. So then Horner has this other straddling section, and Rin ends up visualizing instead of just listening, and she ends up seeing Horner's just crazy libido, and she gets scared enough in this situation that like she runs out of the room. So I marked this because I didn't think it was a good setup for the relationship, considering that up until now they have had zero chemistry. It says, Rin drew a breath, getting control, reaching again to close the vent. Suddenly, Dorner's eyes opened wide. He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward him. Rin cried out, wrenching free. So immediately after this, I think the author thought, oh, I forgot that this book is supposed to be about, like, this hypersexual guy, and we really haven't gotten any sex scenes. So let me just completely ignore all, like, emotional development in the relationship between these two people, and just put in a scene where suddenly they are walking down the street, and they start making out, and they go up to this guy's room, and they have sex. And I was truly whiplashed at this point, because I'm truly trying to not exaggerate, but there is no chemistry between these two people up until this point. So Horner tells her at this point that he is basically basically a crazed sex addict, and that's why he's being tortured by this lady tumor thing in his brain. He tells us that whenever he shows his true intensity to his partners, they end up running away. There's this whole lead up to the two of them having sex. They're undressing and they're kissing, and then I swear to you, this is how it goes. "I'd like to try the first," Dorner said. "Would that be alright?" "Yes," Rin said. 20 minutes later, it just cuts to after they've had sex, which I thought, this book sucks. I'm assuming it's just supposed to be like an erotica at this point, and that's why it's badly written, because nobody cares about the actual writing, it's just about the sex. But then he just skips it. So then we get this incredible revelation, which I was not ready for and I was quite shocked by, where Dorner tells Rin about his first sexual experience, which he believes is sort of the thing that began his, like, crazed sex drive. I'm gonna just repeat one of my trigger warnings from the beginning because this does talk about pedophilia. "It's not something I'm proud of," Dorner said. "I was a virgin. She was the mother of one of my classmates. How old were you?" 12 when it started. Which is, I mean, alright. I think one of the reasons that this is included is to emphasize how toxic Dorner's relationship is to this woman who remains in his life for a long time and is introduced a bit later. But we do get that in many, many other ways. I don't quite understand the point. I don't think it's just handled very well, and it's sort of just skimmed over. We kind of talk about it here, and Rin tells him, you know, it's not your fault, and he says, yes, it is. But then it's never really touched on again, and I think this should have been developed a lot more carefully than it was in this book. So Rin gets curious about these previous sexual partners that Dorner had that he never really was able to connect to, that were so terrified of him. And Dorner replies, "They were frightened, repulsed. When I took the vow, I had to." So then he talks about how when he refused to keep having sex with this woman, whose name we find out is Yoelis, she tried to kill herself, thinking that it would bring Dorner back to her, which is why she's so burned and scarred now. Which is an important thing that we will also get to later. With Rin and Dorner's first sexual encounter, I became a bit skeptical of the author's handling of women and consent, mostly because it seemed like he just wrote women to be enamored and entranced by Dorner without any real consideration of what natural interactions between two human beings look like, and women were very much just objects in his story that served to further the plot. This is sort of accentuated by another, I guess, little detail that is never really touched on again, and just shocked me because it's just starting to all amass to this major red flag, where Rin talks about her first sexual encounter. She says, "I was 23. We were in his room. It hurt and I began to cry. He put his hand over my mouth." Again, why is this necessary? I guess this adds to the fact that her and Dorner's relationship is supposed to be better than any of her previous relationships. So then we get to the thing I talked about with the two other animals in addition to the gibbons. And this is where I just want to tell you, just skip this section. I'll try to put like chapters in so you can see where this ends. If you, like me, are someone who really just cannot deal with harming animals. So basically here, Rin has gone to see Yoelis, and Yoelis has led her to this alley where there is a turtle, and Yoelis has a burlap sack with something moving inside. Yoelis lifted the cat out of her bag. It yowled and twitched its whiskers. Rin could see the engraving on the heart-shaped tag. This is some family's pet. Yoelis lowered the cat towards the turtle's nose. The scaly arm tensed, claws clenching. A corded neck shot out, the turtle's beak gaped, and the hooked jaws engulfed the cat, tearing its body away. Yoelis turned to Rin and shook what was left, the cat's staring head and a stump of a neck, ringing the bell. Then she grabbed Rin's coat pocket and dropped the head in. I will say, I guess I have a personal bias because I really just cannot deal with scenes like this. I do want to say that there are some instances where I think an animal dying is warranted, I guess is a weird way to put it, but it helps the story. For example, just off the top of my head, in The Neverending Story, spoilers by the way, if you've seen it, you know that at one point the horse that one of the main characters rides dies, and it's a very heartbreaking scene. I cried a ton when I watched it as a kid, but it does serve a purpose, and And that's because it tells us that this fantasy world that we're in is dangerous and there are consequences. This story is not just a happy-go-lucky, for sure happy ending. There are heavy stakes. So I do think that in that instance, yeah, it's really sad and it makes me uncomfortable, but it does serve a purpose. That scene adds to the overall story. What is the purpose of this cat being eaten alive? I think what the author was trying to do is show us that Yoelis is really insane and that she's dangerous and that she's crazy. But we already knew that. We know that she is obsessed with Dorner to the point that she will set herself on fire. At least that's what's been described at this point. We know that she stalks him. So this scene doesn't really tell us anything we didn't already know, and all it really functions as is shock value, but in such a disgusting and unnecessary way that when I got to it, my jaw just dropped and I had to like walk away from the book because I had reached my limit for the day. So after this interaction with Yoelis, Rin seems disgusted because she thinks, how could Dorner be in love with this woman? Which I think is a bit of a thing to say because she did groom him as a child. So Rin confronts Dorner and basically asks him to reveal the truth about his relationship with Yoelis. Why? Because she saw that this lady's covered in scars, her boyfriend is covered in scars, and she thinks that there must be a connection between these two things. I think this is a bit of a jump in logic because the author wanted us to have this revelation, but I don't really understand how Rin went from completely trusting and being completely empathetic of Dorner's situation to seeing this lady, having this very brief interaction, and then suddenly not trusting her boyfriend at all. Basically, what we find out is that when Dorner was a child, he found out that he was kind of a pyromaniac. He liked to burn things. And again, this is not really allowed in the dome because fire is a big no-no. And then he began having dreams of setting himself on fire and setting other people on fire. And at one point, when he and Yoelis were having sex, she dropped like a bit of charcoal or something from the torch she was holding onto his back. And this is how he discovered that he had a fetish for being burned and for burning others. So when he told her that he became burned, the explanation that he gave her at the beginning was that he was saving people in this other dome and a fuel canister or something had exploded and burned him. Turns out that's not true, so he lied to her. And actually what happened is he and Yoelis would burn each other. Then it's sort of, I guess, implied that he still thinks of Yoelis and he needs to think of her like burning in order to climax. Rin is kind of turned off by this, which I would understand. I think that's warranted. So she feels like she's been betrayed, she's been lied to, she's really not into this burning fetish thing, and he tells her, don't abandon me, you can't leave me, I need you now, which is gross and a bit of a red flag. So anyway, a bunch of stuff happens. I don't really care enough to remember or to reread it. They keep on fighting and making up. That's like the whole conflict of the book, is them not being in love, but then being in love, but then not being in love. So we get to this part which I like to call consent. Who is she? Don't know her. The first thing that happens, and remember up to this point, Rin has found out about his fetish, does not like it, left him because of it, and now they've made up and they're about to have sex again. So Dorner pulls out a candle and lights it, and she says, I don't like that, put it out. And he's like, I just want to look at it, like I need it there to look at it while we have sex. Oh, okay, hold on, let me actually read you this because it's worse than I can remember. Put it out, she said. Dorner knelt before her. Don't worry, it's just going to sit there and flicker beside us. He set his palm on her arm. She was holding it over her breast. I need to do this, Dorner said. I'm giving fire a place in my life. It's not going to be something twisted and fearful. I'm learning to live with it. You understand? I know you do. On the bedstand, Rin could see the little flame dancing. It had a delight of its own. She thought of the patient she treated, crippled by the scriptures, terrified of heat and healthy desire. I'm sorry, she said. That was foolish of me. So basically, at this point, he's told her, I want to have this flame because I have a fire fetish, but I'm not going to use it. I'm just going to look at it. As with many of the sex scenes in the book, whenever someone is, like, in the heat of it, they sort of have an out-of-body experience. It becomes like a dream sequence. We get it from Rin's perspective this time. And then they finish, and she comes out of it. She edged off the bed, stood, and switched on the light. Dorner was lying on his hip, gazing at her. His hand gripped the candlestick. In the collar was a crooked stub of wax. I wanted you to know, he said. Know what? She knelt on the bed, relieved there was no cause for concern. "I held the flame to your back," he said. She smiled, disbelieving. Then her smile froze. "What have you done?" Rin stood, feeling behind her. "At the base of your spine." She ran her fingers down. When they reached the spot, the pain made her gasp. So at first, Rin is, shocked. She describes it as being very painful. This is something that she told him she didn't want, but she just forgets about it in a bit. So then we get another instance of Rin not really being on board with this fire fetish situation, and Dorner just going ahead with it anyway. And Rin tells him that afterwards she feels sick and ashamed. So again, this is not a pleasant experience for her. Now we get this other instance in one of the straddling sessions. In this instance, they are in Dorner's dreamscape, but Rin is there. Like, her consciousness is there. So her body in his dreamscape isn't just a figment of Dorner's imagination, it's actually Rin. So she's like experiencing this thing alongside him. Let me just read this to you because, again, I don't really know how to summarize it. A breeze whistled to life, shaking the brambles. On the flicking twigs, gold capsules popped, spraying embers like seeds. The seeds landed on Rin and burst into flames. Dorner stepped closer. She had seemed ungainly at first, jerking as the flames hopped over her body. Then, as they joined, her movements grew fluid. Her arms waved, her legs rubbered. The heat melted her innards and bent her bones. Her spine curled, lifting her head. The blackened creature was huffing and shrilling, singing like tongue in her flames, joining the chorus. Then her cheeks blistered and her hair caught fire. The sweet smoke entered his nostrils, and Rin's song ribboned into the wind. So in his fantasy, he burns her alive. And I just really want to emphasize that Rin has repeatedly, throughout the book, expressed disgust and shame at the fire fetish part of their relationship, and has told them that she doesn't want to be burned. I gotta just move on from that because I don't know how to transition out of it. It just horrifies me. So then, again, they're in the dreamscape, and they enter the sort of temple of Dorner's mind, where he has, like, statues of the women he wants to smash. And at this point, Rin, who is with him, finds out, I kid you not, you might need to sit down for this one, that one of the statues of the women that her boyfriend wants to have sex with or has fantasized about is a statue of her mother. When I was like, there's nothing this book can do now that will make me more uncomfortable than I already am. And it did. So then there's this very weird sort of interlude dream sequence, but not really dream, like real life thing going on, where they go to Rin's apartment where she lives with her mom, and it looks like her mom is being assaulted. And then it turns out that it's Rin's dad. But Rin's dad is dead. So it's not really her dad. It's a burned corpse of her dad having sex with her mom. There's this final sequence at the end, which is, I think, is like the final battle against the sex demon. I think it's badly written. It's very confusing. Could be that I was just brain dead at this point. I'm gonna say that it's a mix of that and the fact that this is just a bad book. So basically, Rin and Dorner want to defeat the sex demon, slash Joellis, and they do, I think. But in the process, become these, like, monsters. Rin's room was dark and silent. Two stiff shapes lay on the bed. While they bore traces of humanity, they were unlike humans. Their parts were thick, their frames oversized, and the heads were enlarged, hairless, and glossy. The eye orbits were funnels, as if they'd been drained. Where arms might have been, scaly appendages were melted into their sides, and from the hips the bodies narrowed, vestigial legs fused together, tapering tails hung over the mattress. And then they, like, get married, and they go up to the roof to, like, get married, but it turns out they're not getting married. He's getting married to Joellis, but then he doesn't, because it's a dream, but maybe not. So at the end of the book, Tongue is defeated, I think. And I've lost 3 days of my life that I'm never getting back.